So in our last video we created a TrueType font from direct from Corel, but obviously once we'd actually created it, it didn't have any kerning information in it. It just looked a mess, didn't really display very well. So we've got to use a different piece of software in order to actually make the font work properly for us. Now, I use a piece of software called Type Tool 3. There are loads of options out there. I haven't played around with many of them, to be perfectly honest. I found this one, it was relatively inexpensive and it works. So on that basis, I'm sticking with it. I now know how to use it. It's not great at editing the letters themselves within the type tool, but in terms of actually editing kerning, editing font letter widths and things like that, it seems to do okay. I use a multitude of different bits of software to actually create fonts that work for me. Let's just open the file that we created earlier on. So if I click open font, and this is the TTF that we created before, and you can see the letter A has the dodgy shape to it. So the letter A doesn't have a center, nor does the letter 4, or the number 4 should I say. And if I just double click this letter I, you'll get an indication of why the spacing around the letter I was wrong, because it's saying, well, this is the edge of the letter, the space associated with the letter I, this is the I itself, and this is the other edge. So obviously any letter in this section here to the left of the letter I is not going to come in the right distance away from the letter I as it stands right now. But don't worry, we don't have to do this manually. This will all be done for us automatically. Let's look at the A and the 4 to start off with. If I just double click my A, you can see that the A is there, the center is there, it just doesn't display correctly. Now this is to do with the way that TrueType fonts have directions around the vectors that form it, and I honestly can't tell you what's going on here, but I know that if I click these buttons here and choose the right one, I will end up with an A with the right space here. And if I go to the 4 and do exactly the same process, we end up with a hole in the letter 4. So we have now adjusted the 2 letters that were wrong. Everything else looked fine, so I don't need to worry about those. My next step is to go through and set up some information about this font. So I can either go File, Font Information, or I can click the little button here. I'm going to say, well, who created this? What is it? It's a normal weight. It's not bold. It's regular. Copyright. Blast shop. Whoops. Shop. And that's this year. And then just build those. You'll notice me using these build and diamond functions a reasonable amount here. Designer. Blast shop, and license information, nothing in there. Version, this one is important actually, is the version number, and the reason it's important is that as you're building the font and changing the kerning and the letter spacing or the letter widths, etc., you will need to make sure that you keep an up-to-date revision that updates on a regular basis so that you load and install the latest version. So I'm going to put version 0, but it's revision 1. That's all just fine, and I'll just say font creation date of now. Metrics and dimensions. We leave the UPM size exactly as it was coming out of Corel, and we just click the little diamonds beside the metrics and recalculate and recalculate. Again, I'm not 100% certain what's going on here. I do know that it's important that you click these buttons though. It's to do with the way that the font is displayed when it has a fill that's of a basic colour within Corel. That's what it's there for. I usually just add Latin as a language, and now click apply. So that's that element of it done. The next element, I've already shown you that if you double click the letters, then you can see the nodes, so you can see the various nodes that make up the letter 3, etc. There's another window here called so that was the glyph window. There's another window called metrics window. Metrics window is a little bit different. I'm going to click to start off with on just the letter width mode, and I'm going to type into here, in loving memory of. I'm just going to reduce the height of fraction so that it fits on the one line. So we can see here that the gap between the V and the I is huge. The gap between the E and the M here is tiny. They're almost running into each other. The Y and the R probably need to be a bit closer together. But what we can do is we can get it to do this all automatically for us. A significant chunk, should I say, can be done automatically. So if I click on the button up here and say auto, again, little green diamond, and I'm going to say all characters in the whole font, and just have a medium spacing. You may choose that you want to have a loose spacing. You certainly don't want to go tight for memorial fonts. Loose or very loose may be appropriate. I'm just going to go medium for this one here, and I'm going to click OK, and you can immediately see that it's done a reasonable job of working out where the edge of each letter is and how it should fit in relationship to others. So if I just go back to my letter I, you can now see that the left hand edge of the letter I is close to the edge of the actual letter, and likewise the right of the letter is close to the edge of the actual letter. It's still not quite right. There's still the odd gap here around loving. I'd say that the Y and the R are still a little bit too far away, but actually MEM, that doesn't look too bad now. It's certainly much better than it was. So the next step is to then look at the kerning. So if I can now click on the kerning tab, and then click button up here, and again we're going to go with auto. I want to make every pair kerned, and again I'm just going to choose medium for this point in time and click OK, and you'll see that the V has now moved closer to the O, probably a bit too close in my mind. The Y has moved closer to the R. If we want to make that slightly looser, now if I go extended, click OK, you'll see it's not brought those in quite as much as it did the first time. So if I look at it in loving memory of, that's not a bad approximation. The chances are that there will be words that you'll need to tweak, and there'll be letter combinations that you need to tweak, but unfortunately at this point it's quite a time consuming process. If you've got a font that you're copying of somebody else's, that you have a kerning file that you can use, which sort of says here's an A next to an A next to B, an A next to C, an A next to D, etc, 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 all the way through to Z next to Z. That helps no end. And if anybody's had a font that I've created for them, that's why I ask you for that font, that particular file, because it does make kerning that much easier. So I can now go File, and I can say Generate Font, and I'll just put it in my documents, and I'll just drop it there for the moment. If I click Save, if I go to my documents and just look for English Times, double click, you can now see that the A looks like an A, all these letters and the 4 looks fine, and you can see the version there, version 0.001, and I can click install, and that will install my font. And now it is literally just a case of going through and typing words that you are likely to use. So for example, a common one that I used as a good guide as to whether things are going to look right is passed away. and you can see that past in itself looks okay, but away looks a bit gappy at the moment, and I'd want to bring some of those letters in. I have a set number of words, so I look at mum, dad, granddad, grandma, nana, January, February, March, etc. through to December, in loving memory of, and I will go through all the regular combinations of letters and check that those words look good together. And that's the important thing, because if you were to type into here, past on its own looks okay. If you type into here away on its own looks okay. It's the problem is when you when you put the two words next together, you can see that away is much looser kerned than past is, and that is where the problem lies. It's a time-consuming process getting this right, which is why fonts are expensive, and you end up paying a reasonable amount for fonts, decently kerned ones anyway. So that's how we go about creating and kerning an alphabet.